I am Margaret Maggie Sullivan, 62 years old, a widow, and a former accountant who once prided herself on a sharp mind and an eye for every misplaced number. I spent decades balancing budgets, planning investments, and keeping the family finances in perfect order. My husband, Robert, and I built everything together from scratch: late nights with peanut butter sandwiches, tiny apartments in Boston, endless spreadsheets, and endless dreams. Now, after all those years, I was reduced to a shadow in the eyes of my own children, a mere widow sitting quietly at a dinner table I had helped make possible. That evening, I found myself standing at the threshold of Daniel's coastal mansion, the waves crashing softly in the distance, carrying a salty breeze through the wide windows. Daniel, my eldest, and his wife Sophia had bought the place with a loan my husband and I had co-signed, a detail they never seemed to acknowledge. I carried a dish of homemade apple pie, Robert's favorite, something I had baked hoping for a sliver of warmth, a reminder of family, a taste of home. I imagined, perhaps naively, that even in this grand polished space, there might still be a place for me. But as I stepped into the dining room, the air itself felt heavy, thick with pretense. Daniel was busy pouring expensive red wine into his glass, barely glancing at me. Sophia, in a silk dress and high heels, scrolled on her phone, offering only a forced smile. Ethan, the youngest, nodded faintly, as if greeting a stranger. I sat quietly, a visitor in a home I had helped sustain, invisible yet painfully present. And then the words came. When I dared to ask about the trust fund, Sophia cut me off, her tone sharp, almost venomous. "You're just a widow, Maggie. Better keep quiet." Daniel chuckled dismissively, and Ethan, not to be left out, smirked along. A shiver ran through me, not of fear but of recognition. I was being buried alive, not by time, but by the very children I had nurtured. I set down my fork, rose from the table without a word, leaving the apple pie behind. The laughter of their ignorance echoed behind me, completely unaware that this would be the last time they would ever get to mock me freely. If you're still listening, we want to sincerely thank you for spending your time with us. Truly means a lot. We'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments and let's see how far this message has reached. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, I highly recommend doing it now so you won't miss any of our upcoming stories. These aren't just ordinary stories, they're filled with meaningful life lessons that can inspire, teach, and stay with you long after the video ends. Hit that subscribe button and join our growing community. The dining room was illuminated by a grand chandelier, its crystals scattering soft golden light across the polished mahogany table. The scent of fresh flowers mingled awkwardly with the overpowering perfume Sophia wore, a fragrance so sharp it almost masked the salty breeze drifting from the ocean. Everything about the room screamed wealth and refinement, yet beneath the glittering surfaces lay an unsettling coldness, a pretense as palpable as the tension pressing against my chest. I placed the dish of apple pie gently on the table, its aroma a warm reminder of Robert, his quiet praise for the flaky crust and tender filling echoing in my memory. This pie was more than dessert. It was a fragment of love, a piece of a life built together over decades. I had hoped it might soften the edges of this evening, bridge the distance that had quietly grown between us. But hope was a fragile thing, easily shattered. Daniel barely glanced at me, too absorbed in pouring himself a glass of deep red wine. He raised an eyebrow in passing but said nothing, as if my presence were background noise. Sophia, seated across from me, tilted her head to the side, eyes glued to her phone, fingers scrolling absent-mindedly, lips curling into a rehearsed smile. Every gesture was deliberate, calculated to project charm while concealing contempt. Ethan, my youngest, offered nothing but a faint nod, a mechanical greeting, as though acknowledging a stranger in their home rather than his mother. I tried to speak, my voice calm but firm, asking about the trust fund, about matters Robert and I had spent years arranging for the family. But Sophia's voice cut across me, sharp and mocking. "You're just a widow, Maggie. Better keep quiet." The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Daniel chuckled, a low, dismissive sound that seemed to echo against the walls, while Ethan smirked along, a silent accomplice in their cruelty. I felt a shiver, but it wasn't fear. It was the icy recognition of betrayal, of being dismissed, minimized, reduced to a shadow of my former self in front of the very people I had raised. My hands tightened around the edge of the table, the delicate porcelain of the apple pie plate threatening to slip, yet I did not flinch. I was neither weak nor surprised, only resolute. Without a word, I set down my fork, leaving the apple pie untouched, a symbol of love abandoned in their indifference. I rose from my chair slowly, deliberately, each step echoing against the marble floor. The laughter of Daniel, Sophia, and Ethan followed me to the door, crude and self-satisfied. I didn't look back. Their amusement was hollow, ignorant, fleeting. Unbeknownst to them, that laughter was the last they would ever have freely at my expense. The door clicked softly behind me, and the sound seemed to seal the moment, a quiet prelude to the reckoning that awaited. Outside, the ocean breeze kissed my face, carrying the faint scent of salt and possibility. I breathed deeply, letting the sharp sting of humiliation settle into something else. Focus, clarity, and the knowledge that I would no longer be invisible, no longer silenced. Tonight had been their performance, a display of arrogance and entitlement, but tomorrow everything would change. Tonight they thought they had won. Tomorrow they would understand the weight of underestimating me. I returned home that night, the coastal wind still lingering in my hair, carrying the faint scent of salt and the remnants of Sophia's overpowering perfume. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Instead, I settled into Robert's old armchair, the one he always claimed had the perfect balance of softness and support. Its worn leather held the faint scent of him, a mixture of pipe tobacco and cedar wood, and sitting there, I felt a strange comfort amidst the storm of emotions that had followed me from Daniel's dining room. My hands rested on the armrests, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying Sophia's cutting words and Daniel's dismissive laugh. Then my eyes caught sight of the familiar drawer beneath the armchair, the one Robert had jokingly called his secret vault. I hadn't opened it in years. Hesitant, I slid the drawer open and discovered a thick envelope with my name written in Robert's bold, unmistakable handwriting. Maggie. My heart skipped. Inside the envelope lay a short letter and a set of meticulously organized legal documents. My hands trembled as I unfolded the paper, reading Robert's familiar, steady script. If you are reading this, everything has gone wrong. I've seen Daniel and Sophia's intentions since I fell ill. All assets, house, accounts, company are now in your name. Do not let them silence you. If necessary, burn it all to the ground. Beneath the letter were deeds, stock certificates, and legal documents notarized by our longtime attorney, Harold Baxter. Every signature, every stamp, every line had been carefully prepared, awaiting only my acknowledgement. I sank back into the chair, stunned. Robert had known. He had known they would try to undermine me, that they would exploit my grief and assume I was powerless. Yet, in his quiet, unassuming way, he had left me the means to take control. He had foreseen Daniel's subtle embezzlement, Sophia's sly questioning about assets while he was in the hospital, and he had acted to protect me before he even left this world. A surge of conflicting emotions washed over me. Grief, love, disbelief, and finally clarity. I closed my eyes, letting the weight of his foresight and care settle into my bones. I was shaken, yes, but not broken. The anger that had been simmering since the dinner, the humiliation, the betrayal, shifted into something far more potent, determination. I realized that the quiet, composed widow they had laughed at was no longer powerless. The tools Robert had left behind were more than just legal documents. They were a testament to trust, strategy, and love. They were a call to action, a signal that it was time for me to rise, to reclaim what was mine, and to ensure that justice in its quiet and deliberate way would be served. As dawn approached, I made a decision. I would not wait. I would call Harold first thing in the morning. I would activate every measure Robert had put in place. And as I sat there in the dim light of Robert's armchair, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, a resolute, unshakable sense of power. Tonight had been dark, heavy with insult and betrayal, but tomorrow the balance would shift, and I would be ready. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the curtains, soft and unassuming, a stark contrast to the storm that was about to unfold. Harold, our longtime attorney, arrived promptly with his worn leather briefcase, the kind that had carried decades of legal battles and family secrets. His presence alone brought a sense of gravitas. I trusted him implicitly, and I knew he would execute Robert's plans without question. We settled in the living room, the air thick with the quiet tension of imminent change. I handed Harold the envelope from last night, the one containing Robert's meticulous instructions and legal documents. No one can know until it's done, I instructed firmly. Not a word. Let them feel the shift before they even understand it. Harold nodded, his eyes reflecting both respect and a hint of anticipation. He opened the briefcase, laid out the documents, and we began the process. Each signature I placed, each stamp Harold countersigned, felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been dismissed and belittled for far too long. The transfer was seamless, precise, deliberate. The company, valued at $15 million, the penthouse in downtown Boston, and the seaside retreat in Cape Cod, all were now officially mine. Yet the real power lay not in the ink or the paper, but in the timing, in the quiet patience that Robert had instilled. They would not see this coming. They would only feel its impact. By mid-morning, my phone buzzed incessantly. Daniel's frantic texts demanded explanations. Maggie, what's happening? Why can't I access the accounts? Sophia called repeatedly, her tone syrupy but laced with sharp undertones, begging for clarification, trying to charm her way into an answer. Ethan's messages were hesitant, almost pleading. Mom, did you change the permissions by mistake? I read each one with a growing smile, sipping my tea slowly, deliberately. I didn't reply. Not yet. Let them stew, let them wonder, let the panic build. I could hear their voices in my head, their outrage, their disbelief. The ones who had laughed at me, dismissed me as just a widow, now faced the stark reality that I was in control. The suspense was intoxicating, but I kept my composure. This was not revenge. It was justice, carefully measured and executed with the precision Robert had always admired in me. Hours passed, and the tension only thickened. They called lawyers, tried to access funds through back channels, but every door was locked, every account under my name. My silence became my ally, a weapon sharper than any confrontation. I could almost hear them pacing, guessing, arguing among themselves, while I remained in the calm eye of the storm. By the time evening approached, I felt a quiet satisfaction. The groundwork had been laid, the balance of power shifted, and the first domino had fallen. They thought they had mocked me without consequence. They thought their laughter could linger forever. But the first rays of tomorrow promised a reckoning. And I was ready to meet it, fully aware that the game had just begun. And this time I held all the cards. I arrived at Daniel's house in the late morning, carrying a thick folder that seemed almost too heavy with the weight of what it contained. The coastal sun glinted off the windows of the mansion, reflecting back the life of privilege and indulgence that Daniel and Sophia had long taken for granted. I rang the doorbell, my pulse steady, my posture upright, as if I were merely a guest about to enter someone else's home. But today I was not a guest. I was the owner. Daniel opened the door with a casual, almost dismissive smile, expecting perhaps a polite visit from his mother, the widow he had so easily belittled. Mom? What's the occasion? He asked, his tone light, as though he believed our encounter would be as innocuous as any other family gathering. I stepped inside without a word, letting my eyes meet his briefly before moving into the formal living room. The room smelled faintly of expensive candles and lingering perfume, a carefully constructed illusion of elegance, but I was impervious to it. I placed the folder on the marble table and opened it, letting the documents fall neatly into view. This is the new estate plan, I said, my voice calm but unwavering, carrying the authority that Robert had entrusted to me. Everything is under my control now. The company, the properties, the accounts, all of it belongs to me. Daniel's smile faltered slightly, but he tried to maintain composure. Mom, there's no board approval. This can't be finalized without them, he said, a hint of nervousness creeping in. I lifted a single sheet of paper, sliding it across the table toward him. The board no longer exists, I replied evenly. Robert dissolved it before he passed. Every legal measure has been taken, notarized, and executed. The authority is mine, and it is final. The folder contained every document, every signature, every notarized proof that I now had the ultimate say in matters that had once been mine by right, yet had been so easily dismissed by those I had nurtured. Sophia lunged forward, her manicured hand reaching for the papers, her voice high-pitched and urgent. Maggie, wait. Surely we can negotiate. There must be some compromise. I cut her off with a simple, deliberate gesture, holding up my hand as though swatting away the air itself. "This is not a negotiation," I said, my tone leaving no room for debate. "It is an announcement. You may read the documents, but you may not interfere." Her lips parted in shock, and for the first time, I saw her perfectly practiced composure falter. Ethan remained quiet, standing at the side, eyes wide, a mixture of fear and awe reflecting in his features. The room fell into a tense silence, the kind that presses against the skin and fills the lungs, leaving only the sound of my measured breathing and the faint ticking of a wall clock. The grandeur of the mansion, the expensive furniture, the trappings of wealth, all of it meant nothing in this moment. Power was no longer measured by appearance or inheritance. It was defined by authority, by control, by the ability to act decisively when it mattered most. I stepped back, my gaze sweeping across the room, taking in the stunned faces of Daniel, Sophia, and Ethan. "If you wish to discuss the future of my estate," I said softly but firmly, "you will schedule an appointment with me. Until then, you will respect the boundaries Robert and I have put in place." The weight of my words hung in the air, heavier than any chandelier, colder than the marble floors beneath our feet. For the first time, I felt the full measure of Robert's foresight, the deliberate planning that had ensured I could stand here unchallenged. I was not merely a widow or a passive observer. I was a force shaped by experience, grief, and strategy. The room's energy shifted, subtle but undeniable. No laughter, no mocking smirks, no attempts at dismissal, just the quiet acknowledgement of authority, of a power that had been underestimated for far too long. I gathered the folder, closed it with deliberate care, and turned toward the door. "Consider this a lesson," I said over my shoulder. "Power should never be assumed. Respect is earned, and I have reclaimed what is rightfully mine." Each step I took toward the door was deliberate, a declaration in motion, echoing the certainty that this confrontation was not the end, but the beginning of a reckoning they had never anticipated. Outside, the sunlight seemed brighter, sharper, almost celebratory. I left the mansion knowing that the seeds of change had been sown. They had laughed at me, doubted me, and dismissed me as nothing more than a widow. Now, in the quiet aftermath of that confrontation, they would have to reckon with the truth. I was not just a survivor, I was the one in control, and they had no choice but to face it. A few days after the confrontation at Daniel's mansion, Harold called me early in the morning, his voice unusually grave. "Maggie," he said, "I've discovered something serious. Daniel has been forging Robert's signature to secure a $700,000 loan from the company accounts. He's been using it for a yacht, lavish parties in the Hamptons, and extravagant displays of wealth. He started while Robert was still hospitalized, weak and barely able to lift a glass of water. I felt a wave of disappointment, not for the money lost, but for the betrayal, my own son exploiting trust so carelessly. Yet I did not panic, nor did I act immediately. Instead, I allowed the knowledge to settle. I wanted Daniel to continue digging his own hole, to expose himself fully through his greed and recklessness. Patience had always been Robert's strategy, and now it was mine. By late morning, I began reclaiming what was mine, strategically and silently. First, I sold the yacht, the very symbol of Daniel's arrogance and careless indulgence. Next, I seized the penthouse he had flaunted endlessly on social media, a monument to his delusions of grandeur. Finally, I canceled Ethan's lease on the luxury apartment he had rented through the company, reminding him that access and privilege came with responsibility, something he had long forgotten. Sophia, ever cunning and desperate, attempted her own maneuver. She sent a document claiming I had lost my mental capacity, hoping to invalidate the transfers and regain control over the assets. I read her letter carefully, a thin smile playing across my lips. She had tried to exploit the legal system, bribing a notary and fabricating evidence. But Harold, ever thorough, traced every signature, every transaction, and discovered the fraud. The morning Sophia realized she had been caught, I could almost hear the sharp intake of her breath. The police arrived promptly, well before she could retreat behind any of her high-heeled theatrics. Standing in the driveway, clutching her designer handbag, she screamed and protested, but the law did not bend for arrogance or deception. She was arrested on the spot, her schemes unraveling under the weight of evidence meticulously documented by Harold. For the first time, I saw fear and confusion replace her usual air of superiority. Daniel, watching helplessly, tried to negotiate, to appeal to some lingering filial duty or maternal mercy. But I remained calm, composed, a reflection of Robert's foresight and my own resolve. The documents lay before me as both shield and sword. I was not acting out of vengeance, but from a place of justice, calculated, precise, and inevitable. Each asset reclaimed, each fraudulent attempt neutralized, reaffirmed my authority and sent a clear message. No deception, no manipulation could override truth and preparation. Ethan, seeing his privileges stripped away, began to understand the consequences of entitlement and inaction. I reached out to him quietly later, not with anger, but with the lesson that trust, responsibility, and integrity are not inherited, they are earned. By the evening, the storm had passed, but the impact was undeniable. The yacht was gone, the penthouse belonged to me, Sophia was in custody, and Daniel's reckless financial maneuvers had left him scrambling. I sipped my tea in the quiet of my home, letting the satisfaction settle in. Not the shallow sweetness of revenge, but the deep, steady satisfaction of justice executed with precision. For the first time since Robert's passing, I felt the full measure of control he had entrusted to me, the culmination of years of preparation, foresight, and strategy. The laughter at that fateful dinner seemed distant, meaningless. Those who had dismissed me, called me just a widow, and plotted in secret, now confronted the truth. I was not powerless. I was decisive. I was vigilant. And I was finally unequivocally in command. A few days after the chaos had settled, my phone buzzed with a message that made my heart tighten. It was from Lily, Daniel and Sophia's 16-year-old daughter. The text was simple, innocent, and filled with the kind of honesty only teenagers possess. Grandma, I don't really understand everything that's happening, but I miss Grandpa. I wish things weren't like this. I hope you're okay. I stared at the screen, feeling a mixture of sorrow and tenderness. Lily had grown up amidst privilege, yet she hadn't inherited the cunning or entitlement that had poisoned her parents. There was a spark of truth and innocence in her words that reminded me of Robert. The way he could see the heart of someone before they even spoke, the way he valued integrity above all else. I immediately called Harold and instructed him to transfer the ownership of the small house in the suburbs, the place where Robert had spent countless evenings reading, where he and I had shared quiet moments away from the world, into Lily's name. It wasn't a grand mansion or a multi-million-dollar penthouse, but it was a home imbued with love, stability, and memory. More importantly, it would be a tangible lesson for Lily. That honesty, kindness, and respect are far more valuable than any material wealth. When Lily received the news, her reaction was pure and unfiltered. She cried, overwhelmed, saying she didn't feel deserving of such generosity. I smiled softly as I replied, "You are deserving, Lily, because you have never pretended to be someone you're not. You've remained true, even when the adults around you have not. That is what makes you worthy of this." I wanted her to understand that life would always test her, but integrity, patience, and courage were the traits that would allow her to navigate it successfully. I also made a decision to share more than just property. Over the next few weeks, I spent time with Lily, teaching her the basics of financial responsibility, the importance of honesty in all dealings, and how to recognize manipulation before it could harm her. She listened intently, asking questions, her eyes bright with curiosity and a genuine desire to learn. I saw in her a future that was unspoiled by deceit, a future where she could make choices with clarity and moral strength. Through her, I could extend Robert's legacy, not just the legal and financial safeguards we had put in place, but the deeper values that had guided our lives. I wanted Lily to grow up knowing that wealth without character is meaningless, that being entitled is not the same as being capable, and that courage often comes in quiet, persistent forms rather than dramatic gestures. As I watched her stand in the doorway of her new home for the first time, a sense of calm and purpose settled over me. The battles with Daniel and Sophia had been necessary, but this, nurturing the next generation, ensuring that justice and wisdom continued, was the most fulfilling part of all. Lily represented hope, honesty, and the potential to break cycles of greed and deceit. In her bright, trusting eyes, I saw the reflection of the life Robert and I had built together, not only in terms of wealth or assets, but in terms of values, resilience, and the courage to stand firm in the face of betrayal. By placing the home in her hands and sharing with her the lessons of our lives, I was planting seeds for a future where integrity and authenticity would prevail, and where she could flourish, unburdened by the shadows of the past. Lily was my quiet victory, the assurance that even in a world of deception and ambition, goodness and honesty could survive, grow, and thrive. And in helping her, I felt the weight of loss lift slightly, replaced by hope, love, and the knowledge that the next generation might do better than the last. Once the dust had settled from reclaiming what was rightfully mine and securing Lily's future, I felt a quiet but persistent calling to do more. The experience with Daniel and Sophia had shown me not only the depths of betrayal within a family, but also the vulnerability of those left powerless by circumstance or greed. I realized that my journey, my struggle, could serve as more than just a personal victory. It could be a beacon of hope for others. I decided to establish the Robert Sullivan Foundation, named in honor of the man whose foresight, wisdom, and love had guided me through the darkest days. The mission was clear: to support widowed women whose inheritance or assets had been wrongfully seized or manipulated by family members, financial institutions, or opportunists. These were women who, like me, had devoted their lives to family, only to be dismissed and underestimated at the moment they were most vulnerable. The foundation became my new focus. Each case we took on was carefully reviewed, supported by legal counsel, and structured to empower the women involved, not just financially, but psychologically and emotionally. Our first applicant, a widow from Ohio, had been forced out of her home by her children mere weeks after her husband's passing. We ensured she regained legal control, provided temporary housing, and connected her with financial advisors. The look on her face when she realized her life was no longer dictated by those who sought to exploit her was indescribable. A mixture of relief, astonishment, and most importantly, renewed dignity. Establishing the foundation was more than philanthropy. It was a declaration of strength and responsibility. It was a transformation of personal pain into collective empowerment. I drew upon the same clarity, discipline, and strategy that Robert had instilled in me during our years together. Each decision, each legal maneuver, each moment of mentorship to the women we helped, reinforced a profound truth. Power is not only about wealth, it is about the courage to act, the wisdom to protect others, and the moral obligation to make a difference. Through the Robert Sullivan Foundation, my personal twist, the humiliation at Daniel's dining room, the betrayal, the uncovering of deceit, was transformed into a story with purpose. It was no longer only about reclaiming assets or asserting authority. It became about justice, mentorship, and the amplification of voices too often silenced. Every widow we helped, every success story that emerged from our support, became a testament to the idea that adversity could be repurposed into action, and that strength once earned can be shared. Even as I sat in my office reviewing the cases, corresponding with attorneys and beneficiaries, I felt the same quiet pride that had come the day I signed the final documents reclaiming what was mine. But now it was magnified. A personal victory multiplied across lives, communities, and futures. The foundation gave me a platform to teach, to guide, and to ensure that those who once felt powerless could find their own voice, their own agency, their own strength. In a way, the journey came full circle. The woman Daniel and Sophia had dismissed as just a widow was now an agent of change, wielding not only legal authority but moral influence. I had learned that true strength is measured not only by what you can take back, but by what you can give forward. And as I read the latest success story from our team, a woman who had regained her family home and started a small business, I felt a surge of fulfillment that no personal victory could ever match. The Robert Sullivan Foundation became my legacy, a living embodiment of resilience, foresight, and compassion. It was proof that a personal twist, a moment of betrayal and insult, could be transformed into inspiration, empowerment, and enduring impact. I had taken the pain, the humiliation, and the shock, and turned it into something far greater than revenge. A source of hope, a guide for justice, and a testament to the enduring power of integrity and action. I returned to the dining room one last time, standing tall before the familiar table that had once been the stage for mockery and disdain. Daniel, Ethan, and Sophia sat there, their eyes avoiding mine, hesitant and uncertain. The air was thick with the memory of their laughter, the weight of their arrogance, but I felt none of the fear or shame that had once gripped me. This time I stood not as a widow dismissed, but as a woman who had reclaimed her life, her dignity, and her authority. I didn't seek their forgiveness, nor did I desire reconciliation. My purpose was not to punish them, but to honor myself, to live fully and authentically. I spoke once, my voice calm yet resolute. I have rebuilt what was mine, and I have done it not out of vengeance, but because I refuse to be diminished by anyone. Respect and integrity are not negotiable, they are earned, and I have chosen to live by them. As I turned toward the door, sunlight poured through the windows, golden and brilliant, catching every corner of the room. It reminded me of Robert's words spoken years ago on a morning much like this, perfect for starting anew. And in that light I felt the truth of it. Freedom, strength, and self-respect could shine brighter than any insult, any betrayal, any loss. The lessons were clear. Self-respect is priceless, resilience is transformative, and true power is not wielded for revenge but for living boldly and authentically. Stand firm, honor yourself, and let your life be the proof of your worth. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories of resilience, justice, and self-worth. Share your thoughts below. How have you reclaimed your strength after being underestimated?